Back in the 2000s, pop rock music was one of the most dominant genres in the US, in no small part due to Avril Lavigne. Her first three albums were hugely successful, spawning hits that are still well known to this day, such as Skater Boy, Girlfriend, and My Happy Ending. However, her fourth album, 2011's Goodbye Lullaby, marked somewhat of a downturn for her career. While it was still successful, it didn't reach the same commercial heights as her previous works. But was this because the album wasn't as strong as the others? Or is there more that could explain Goodbye Lullaby's relative underperformance? To understand this record, let's look at where Avril was at this point in her career. In 2007, she dropped The Best Damn Thing, which became one of the highest selling albums of that year. While it was obviously a huge smash, the record polarized fans, with some thinking Avril had leaned too far into the pop side of pop rock, as opposed to her earlier records, which were generally grungier and less overtly radio-friendly. Still, it was an undeniable success, but after touring for it, she was ready to explore a more stripped-back sound and make a record that was more personal than anything she'd ever done. Whether or not this was in response to the criticism The Best Damn Thing faced, we'll probably never know, though I do feel like Avril genuinely wanted to do something that was more from the heart. Her separation from husband and Sum 41 frontman Derek Whibley in 2009 was obviously weighing very heavily on her, and I'd imagine that she really wanted to make music that reflected her headspace at the time. Work on the album began as early as November 2008, when Avril recorded a short song called Black Star for her fragrance of the same name. The song ended up being the intro to the album, and she would record about 8 more songs through July 2009. Even though their marriage was clearly not working out, she and Derek actually produced much of the album together at her home recording studio. In an interview, Derek said the album was more meaningful and emotional than her other ones. Avril echoed this sentiment, saying she was previously underestimated as a songwriter, and that this time, she'd be taking the reins. At this point, Goodbye Lullaby was slated for a November 17, 2009 release date, though this got pushed back several times, as Avril said the record was too slow, and needed some more upbeat tracks, though in actuality, the pressure to have more upbeat songs was really coming from her record label RCA, who was worried the album was turning out to be too melancholy. In August 2010, Avril started working with producer Alex the Kid, who produced hits such as Eminem's Love the Way You Lie and B.O.B.'s Airplanes. He stated the record was gonna have some more hip-hop leaning tracks, though in the end, none of the songs he worked on made it onto the album. Avril said she was gonna do something with the tracks they produced, though they remain unreleased to this day. If I had to guess, I feel like it may have been RCA who wanted her to collab with Alex, as they were concerned Goodbye Lullaby didn't have enough radio-friendly songs. There's no official statements that say that was the case, but I could see that happening, as Avril stated in October 2010 that the album had actually been finished for roughly a year, but the label wanted her to go in a different direction, one that was more in line with the popular sounds of the late 2000s. While she did stand her ground and fight to keep the record true to her vision, some compromises were made, notably with the lead single, the Max Martin and Shellback produced What the Hell, which dropped in January 2011. An upbeat, anthemic track about doing whatever you want despite what people think, the song was described by Avril as the least personal on the album, and it's pretty obvious why. I love What the Hell, but it certainly isn't representative of Goodbye Lullaby at all. She said it was chosen as the lead single so it could bridge the gap between her old and new stuff, which I can sort of understand, but it still reeks to me of the record label pushing her to have a radio-friendly pop hit, despite the direction she wanted to go in. What the Hell was a moderate hit in the US, and was well received by fans and critics, but the era was already off to a somewhat confusing start. Avril had been saying this was going to be a deeper, more emotional record, but the first taste we got of it was something that would have fit on The Best Damn Thing. The album itself finally dropped in March 2011, and reception was mixed. Some appreciated Avril's more candid songwriting and maturity, while others thought she was out of her depth in trying to do a more serious record. It debuted and peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200, with roughly 87,000 copies sold, a steep decline from The Best Damn Thing, which debuted at number 1, with about 289,000 copies sold in its first week. To drum up some more hype, Avril asked fans on Twitter to help her decide between the songs Push or Smile as the next single. I'm just speculating again here, but I always felt like Avril really wanted Push to be the next single, as it's the more personal track, but her label probably wanted Smile, since it was the more upbeat, poppy song. Evidently, the label might have had a point, as Smile ultimately won out, and was released as a single in April 2011. The song was well liked by critics and performed moderately well, but it was still a track that harkens back to her previous sound. The song, co-written and once again produced by Max Martin and Shellback, is about her gratitude for the person who makes her smile. And to be fair, I do think the lyrics are deceptively more personal than you would think, but again, on the surface, this is the kind of bratty, over-the-top, expletive-filled track that people had come to expect from Avril. Not that that was a bad thing at all, but there was a clear disconnect between how Goodbye Lullaby actually was as an album, and the singles that were chosen to represent it. Goodbye Lullaby is largely a record about heartbreak, and the toll her separation and eventual divorce had taken on her mentally, mainly on songs like I Love You, Push, Remember When, and Goodbye. There's even a song called Darlin', which she had written when she was a teenager, showing how this really was a deeper peek into Avril's life. The music itself is more stripped back than her last 3 albums as well, being heavily acoustic to emphasize her voice and emotions. The album is completely different from what the first 2 singles would lead you to believe, and it was truly only the 3rd and final single, Wish You Were Here, that actually represented it accurately. She even stated it felt right for it to be a single, as it showed the more vulnerable side that she was exploring on this record. Wish You Were Here is a power ballad about missing someone, and it's written broadly enough where anyone could relate to it. Whether it be a best friend, a family member, a pet, or whoever else, we've all missed someone at some point in our lives, and the song captures that raw emotion of just wanting to be with them. This song would have made for a far more fitting lead single. Again, I love What the Hell and Smile, but they were very clearly meant to be accessible, radio-friendly hits, when that wasn't really what Avril wanted. This was an opportunity to show how she grew and matured in her artistry, but that's not how Goodbye Lullaby was marketed to the general public, making for a confusing era that sadly didn't live up to her previous ones. I also think the record being delayed so much definitely hurt its performance. It had been 4 years since The Best Damn Thing, and music had changed drastically from 2007. Suddenly, there were tons of new artists, like Lady Gaga, Kesha, and Katy Perry, who not only filled in the space left by Avril, but completely transformed the sound of popular music. A record like Goodbye Lullaby never really stood a chance against the other releases from the time, and while I don't necessarily think it would have been that much more successful had it been released in 2009, I do think it probably would have done a little better, since she still had so much hype after The Best Damn Thing. And even if a heavily acoustic album in 2009 wasn't gonna do Lady Gaga or Beyonce numbers, it's not like that matters, as long as Avril was happy with the finished product. She wanted a more confessional and honest record, but RCA clearly wasn't having it, and their meddling led to a confusing rollout that unfairly hindered the album's performance. And I'll be honest, Goodbye Lullaby is actually one of my least favorite Avril albums. I like it just fine, but I find a lot of it to be somewhat repetitive and unmemorable. There's great highlights like Not Enough, Push, and the singles, and if we're including bonus tracks, Alice, the song she did for the live-action Alice in Wonderland movie, fucking slaps. But I don't think the highs of this record come close to the highs of her earlier or later releases. I appreciate her candidness, but I feel like vulnerable, emotional records like this have simply been done better by other artists, which is why I don't revisit Goodbye Lullaby very often. Despite that, I still think this record was done dirty, and it should have had singles that represented the tone she was going for, and it absolutely shouldn't have been shelved for a year just so RCA could cram some pop hits into it. I'm actually surprised it manages to sound as cohesive as it does, despite having 2 songs that stick out like a sore thumb. Looking back, this era really felt like a botched compromise. Avril wanted to make a non-commercial, meaningful album, while her label wanted her to stick to the formula that made her previous eras successful. In the end, we did get a meaningful album, but it was misrepresented by its singles. No one really won here. Avril had her artistic vision tampered with, and RCA didn't get the mega hit record they were hoping for. And while we certainly could place a majority of the blame on RCA for shelving it for so long, I still don't really think an album this stripped back would have won over that many people in 2009 either. I think it would have been better off being released independently, so Avril wouldn't have had to cave to the demands of a record label, and got to make it exactly how she wanted. It still may not have been a commercial juggernaut, but at least it would have been closer to her exact vision. And who knows, maybe having a more earnest record that wasn't so badly misrepresented by its singles would have gotten more people on board with the album, since they actually would have known what they were getting into. But sadly, that's not how things panned out. Goodbye Lullaby marked a turning point in Avril's career, and started a downward trajectory that would continue through the 2010s. While she's definitely had more hits, and continues to be a beloved figure in the pop punk and pop rock community, she never got to the same heights of her first 3 records, which is totally fine. In my eyes, she's a legend regardless of how many sales she gets. Still, I can't help but wonder how differently her career and overall popularity would have been had this album done better.